Many years ago, this was back when I was still practicing law, I lived in a small town in central Illinois that had the distinction of hosting the first of 7 debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas back in 1860. The town square where these debates were held became, as you would expect, a historic landmark, and each Christmas, a local private organization would erect 16 huge paintings depicting scenes from the Gospels. I think I got something ringing up here.
Yeah.
Let me see if there's something. I'm going to turn that off. And is that better? That's good. All right. So those are the paintings. They're kind of hard to see. It's a little bit blurry. That's the best picture I could find, but it gives you an idea how big they were. There are 16 of them. They covered the whole end of the park. They had put them up at Christmas, but there were really only 2 or 3 scenes that depicted events from the Nativity. The rest were the miracles and different events from the life of Jesus. Now, as you might expect, this is back in the early 90s, so there was a lawsuit about these paintings, claiming that the paintings were an establishment of religion being placed in a public park, violating the First Amendment. And at first, the federal district court issued an injunction preventing the paintings from being displayed. But then later on, the Circuit Court of Appeals, they reversed it, saying that because the paintings were neither owned by the city nor erected by the city, private entities could continue to put these paintings up. Now, I'll tell you, I never really cared for the paintings. When you look at them close up, they were old, they were faded, they were getting yellow, and from an artistic standpoint, they were neither good nor beautiful. They displayed this kind of stilted piety that I think went out in the Middle Ages sometime, but I generally ignored them. But as you might imagine, after the lawsuit, the local citizens, they loved their paintings even more. But they failed to read the rest of the court's decision, apparently, which said that if these paintings are going up in a public park, anyone else with a display would be free to put their own ideas out there alongside the paintings. So, guess what happened? Each year there were other opposing displays erected. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion is a two-way street. It's a multifaceted thing. Now, the most notable of these other displays was this huge banner that this group put up at the opposite end of the park, proclaiming Jesus Christ is a myth. Yeah. Every year, this kind of a banner was erected, and every year the result was the same. Vandals destroyed, defaced, or removed the banner. One year it was a Sunday school teacher. Stole it, took it down, stole it, took it home. Another year, I kid you not, a guy dressed as Santa Claus gets up on a ladder with a can of spray paint and tries to cover the thing up. And finally, everybody got sick of those theatrics, so they just simply put a match to it and burned it in place. 2 of those incidents resulted in prosecutions and convictions. Colorful little town I lived in, eh? I know, it sounds like something out of a sitcom, right? But I'm here to tell you that this actually happened. It reminds me of this line from a Charlie Brown Christmas. Charlie Brown's complaining to Linus that he always gets depressed around Christmas, and Linus has a very compassionate reply. He says, "Charlie Brown, you're the only person I know who can take a wonderful season like Christmas and turn it into a problem." Apparently there are lots of Charlie Browns out there in the world. Some of them like to complain about Starbucks cups not being Christmassy enough. Others think that people shouldn't be allowed to say Happy Holidays and complain about some imaginary war on Christmas. Why do we insist on turning Christmas into a problem? What we need is someone to blame. What we need is a good old-fashioned scapegoat. And I just happen to have one. And when I said old, I mean old. Meet Pope Julius I. They didn't call him Pope back then. They were known as the Bishop of Rome. Pope Julius I, Bishop of Rome in the years 337 to 352. I give you our scapegoat, the person who is responsible for people turning Christmas into a problem now for going on many, many hundreds of years. Pope Julius, back in 350, thought that it would be a great idea to establish December 25th as the date of Jesus' birth, even though nobody really knows the actual date. Read the Gospels, you won't find a date. You can get some clues from some of the activities they talk about, like shepherds in the fields, minding their flocks and things like that. And all those clues tell us is that it couldn't have been on any date that matches December 25th on the Roman calendar. No, the real reason that Pope Julius liked December 25th is because the pagans were already having some big, wild celebrations, and he wanted to take advantage of those festivities and co-opt them and turn them into a Christian holiday. It turns out he was too clever for his own good, because the pagan customs went on right alongside the Christian religious trappings and created this hybrid holiday that we still have today. Part pagan, part Christian. You see, the thing that Pope Julius didn't realize is that pagan doesn't mean stupid. When the Christian missionaries came along with their stories about Jesus, nobody, not even the early Christians, were taking those stories literally. They understood the power of myth. They understood the power of stories to convey a deeper truth. Now, the truth that they saw in these stories was that this Jesus was one of them. The word pagan comes from the Latin word paganus, which means a person who lives in a rural area or village. That's all. They saw Jesus as a fellow pagan, born in a stable, going around the countryside, living off the land. He was homeless. Just like the pagans, he didn't own any land. He had no earthly power, no earthly wealth. The pagans heard the stories and they said, hey, he's one of us. They didn't care about heaven or hell or faith or salvation. They didn't care about substitutionary atonement or any of that highfalutin stuff which came later when that religion about Jesus was created. They didn't care about any of that. What they were drawn to was the idea, this idea that Jesus had about something that he called the kingdom of heaven. This was a place where the social order would be reversed. The last would be first, the first would be last. It started out as a community of equals. No barriers based on gender, ethnicity, or class status. Love, kindness, generosity, service, nonviolence rounded out the foundation values for this new community, this new way of living. So these people called pagans, they were more than happy to include those ideas in their solstice celebrations. Those traditions became intertwined with Christmas in ways that Pope Julius never dreamed of or probably wanted. In fact, Christmas fell out of fashion in England and America in the 1600s, partly because the super religious didn't like all of these pagan customs going on alongside. They thought it was blasphemous to eat, drink, and be merry on such a serious occasion as the birth of their Lord, King, and Savior. I blame the Puritans. And as you know, H.L. Mencken defined a Puritan thusly. A Puritan is someone who is desperately afraid that somewhere someone might be having a good time. Thank you very much. So what we see here is that apparently Christmas has always been a problem for some people. Christmas as we know it today was rescued in this country by the writings of Washington Irving. This is one of his early books up here called Christmas from the Sketchbook of Washington Irving, Old Christmas by Washington Irving. And he in turn influenced Charles Dickens, who came over from England. Charles Dickens took the holiday back to England, complete with all the pagan customs of bringing greenery indoors, of mistletoe, of lighting the Yule log to symbolize the return of the light after the winter solstice. And of course Santa Claus, or Kris Kringle, or Father Christmas as he's known in England, all of that was brought back into the celebration, again thanks to Washington Irving and Charles Dickens. That's what you get when you cross a religious story with pagan celebrations. And I'm sure Pope Julius thought that the gospel stories would simply snuff out the pagan stuff, but he got that one totally wrong, didn't he? Frankly, I think it's a great story. Christmas wouldn't be what it is today without that, this hybrid holiday. I think it's called the law of unintended consequences, and in this case I think it worked out just fine, because nobody gets to claim Christmas as their own exclusive holiday. And we should really say thanks to Pope Julius and the pagans for making Christmas that's something more universal and inclusive. Like I said before, pagan doesn't mean stupid. They were wise in their own way. And it was the kind of wisdom that looked beyond the literal meaning of those birth stories that we find in Luke and Matthew. They looked beyond the literal meaning, and what they saw symbolically was this idea of a birth of a new consciousness, birth of a new idea in consciousness. They got that. They got that. You know, these were people who were intimately connected to the cycles of the earth, the stars, the planets. And they tapped into something in humankind that's universal and eternal. Now, we may know a lot more about the stars and the planets than people did 2,000 years ago, but one thing is still the same. We still measure our lives by the cycles of nature, just like those people we call pagans did. We're all people of the earth, and not just that, but we're truly people of the universe. The great astronomer Carl Sagan said that we are made of star stuff. The molecules in our bodies come from elements that were manufactured and forged in red giant stars a few billion years ago. We don't just measure our lives by the cycles of nature, we're a part of it in a very real way. So we have, I think, the privilege and the opportunity to celebrate both the solstice and the birth of that new idea in consciousness that's symbolized by the Christmas stories. We get to do both. When the physical light is returning to this part of the earth marked by the solstice, we take time to reflect on the light and the power of an idea that needs to take root and evolve along with the rest of us. So, you know, in Unity, what we call that idea the Christ, the best of our humanity, our great potential. When we manifest those best aspects of our humanity and start to approach our true potential in terms of how we treat each other, we can truly say that the divine has become human. And the human has become divine. There is a technical theological word for that. It's called incarnation. God taking on human form. But it's a mistake to think that this was a one-time in history event that happened 2016 years ago. I like what Parker Palmer has to say on the subject. He's a Quaker. He's a well-known author and educator. He focuses on issues of education, leadership, spirituality, and social change. Here's what he says. He says, if the incarnation means anything, it means that the mind of Christ is a mind that mortals can take on. That's the message of Christmas. Isn't that what we teach in Unity? That sums it up beautifully. If you want to know what the incarnation looks like, go take a look in the mirror. It's that simple. It's that simple. Another thing Parker Palmer says is that incarnation involves risk. Incarnation involves risk. Notice in the Christmas story, especially well, in both Luke and Matthew, he comes into the world not as some fully formed avatar or warrior, right? He comes into the world as a human infant, as vulnerable as any human infant, and had to be guarded and guided and protected by his parents. Lots of symbolism there as well. Mary and Joseph, feminine and masculine, intuition and intellect, both required in equal measure in order to bring this Christ idea to full potential. So Christmas only becomes a problem when we lose sight of the deeper symbolic meaning. And it's really so easy to see. So easy, a pagan could do it. And a pope couldn't. I'm going to give the last word to Parker Palmer today. This is my Christmas wish, if you will. He says, for those of us who celebrate Christmas, the best gift we can offer others, whatever their faith or philosophy may be, is a simple question asked with heartfelt intent. What good words wait to be born in us, and how can we love one another in ways that midwife their incarnation? See you next week.